The cemetery was silent, but it wasn't peace that hung in the air. It was tension. Rows of glossy black cars lined the narrow path, their engines ticking faintly as they cooled. Under a white funeral tent, mourners sat shoulder to shoulder, faces hidden behind dark sunglasses, pretending their grief was as heavy as the wind. At the center of it all, a golden casket gleamed under the weak afternoon light. On its plaque, the name read, Judith Anderson, age 58. Billionaire, visionary, and the woman who built Anderson Towers from nothing but ambition and sleepless nights. The pastor stood at the head of the grave, Bible in hand, his voice calm but unsure. Every word about a life well lived floated away too quickly, as if the air itself refused to hold them. Judith's husband, William Anderson, stood nearby, handkerchief pressed to his lips. He didn't wipe his tears, he posed with them, like a man performing grief for an audience that already knew the ending. Her employees filled the back rows, whispering about the company's future. "What happens to the board?" one murmured. "She didn't leave an heir, did she?" another asked. No one really spoke of Judith herself, only of what she left behind. The air thickened. Even the flowers seemed too extravagant, white lilies and roses arranged so perfectly that they felt more like decoration than sympathy. Someone's phone buzzed, then quickly fell silent. A child coughed. The pastor cleared his throat again, fumbling for his next line. When he finally motioned to the two grave workers, everyone leaned forward. The ropes tightened in their hands. The casket hovered above the cement-lined grave, one slow breath away from disappearing beneath the earth forever. And then it happened. A voice, rough and trembling but clear as thunder, cut through the solemn air. "Stop! Don't bury her!" Heads turned in unison. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who said that? What's going on? Who dares interrupt this?" From the back row, a man pushed forward, his coat torn, his beard wild, his shoes caked in dust. Mourners stepped aside, clutching their handbags and pearls, eyes wide with disgust. The smell of rain and sweat followed him like a shadow. His voice rose again, breaking the pastor's silence. She's not dead, I'm telling you, she's not dead." Gasps spread like wildfire. Security guards moved toward him, but he didn't flinch. He pointed straight at the casket, his hand shaking but his tone steady. "Please, listen to me. You're about to bury her alive." William's handkerchief froze midair. His expression hardened, the mask of grief slipping for the briefest second. Then, with cold authority, he barked, "Get this man out of here." But the stranger took another step forward. The wind caught his coat, lifting it slightly, revealing a weathered satchel strapped across his chest. His eyes, sharp, desperate, unblinking, stayed fixed on Judith's golden casket. The guards hesitated. The pastor stammered, unsure whether to continue or call the police. Phones were raised now, cameras recording what no one could yet understand. And through all of it, that voice again, lower, firm, breaking under the weight of truth. "You don't know what was done to her," he said, "but I do." The cemetery seemed to hold its breath. Even the leaves stopped moving. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman whispered, "Who is he?" The stranger swallowed hard, then lifted his chin, his next words slicing through the air like a verdict. "My name is Benjamin," he said quietly, "and I won't let you bury her." A stunned silence fell over the mourners. The grave workers froze with their ropes in hand. The pastor's Bible slipped from his fingers and landed softly on the grass. Then, all at once, murmurs, panic, disbelief. Someone shouted for the guards again, another called for the police. But the man stood his ground, trembling, resolute. The only sound that followed was the wind brushing against the casket's golden edge. And somewhere beneath that shining lid, something moved. If you're watching this right now, take a second, hit the subscribe button, and tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. Because trust me, what happens next at that graveside will make you question everything you thought you knew about life and death. The crowd parted as Benjamin pushed forward, his every step scraping against marble and grass. His coat, long, brown, and torn at the sleeves, flapped with each gust of wind. Dust clung to his shoes, his beard was overgrown, and yet there was something unshakably steady in his eyes. He didn't stumble like a drunk or wander like a lunatic. He moved with purpose, as if he had come here for this exact moment. Gasps rippled through the mourners. Expensive perfume mixed with the faint scent of earth and rain as people leaned away, clutching handbags and pearl necklaces, their disgust louder than their fear. Someone hissed, "Where did this man even come from?" Another whispered, "He's crazy." Security should have stopped him. The guards hesitated at the edge of the crowd, unsure whether to grab him or listen. The tension was heavy enough to quiet even the whispering wind. Benjamin stopped just short of the open grave, his eyes locked on the golden casket. His voice trembled but didn't break. "She's not dead," he said again, more firmly this time. "I can prove it." The statement landed like a slap. Mourners exchanged bewildered looks, and then came the sound of phones clicking on, one, then another, then dozens. The sight of a ragged stranger interrupting a billionaire's burial was too strange to ignore. Cameras turned toward him, recording, waiting for the collapse, the outburst, the madness that never came. William Anderson's voice cut through the murmuring like a blade. "Get him out of here," he ordered, pointing sharply toward Benjamin. "He's disturbing the peace." But Benjamin didn't move. His voice shifted, lower now, calmer, heavier, the way truth sounds when it can no longer be contained. "You know what you did, Williams." Every head turned toward the grieving husband. For a heartbeat, even the pastor froze. William blinked, his jaw tightening. "What did you say?" Benjamin's eyes never left him. "You heard me." His tone was calm, but behind it pulsed something electric, conviction. "You know exactly what you did to her." The hush that followed was like a storm before it breaks. Mourners glanced between the two men, unsure whether to step back or listen closer. The pastor held his breath, clutching his Bible as if it might stop what was about to unfold. William forced a shaky laugh, but his voice betrayed him. "You're delusional," he snapped. "I don't know you. I've never seen you in my life." Benjamin tilted his head. "Oh, you've seen me," he said softly. "You just didn't look long enough to remember." The crowd began to murmur again. Someone whispered, "He knows him?" Another gasped, "Is he blackmailing him?" A man in a designer suit raised his phone higher, recording everything. William's face darkened. He stepped closer, his voice rising with anger. "You have no right to be here. This is my wife's funeral." Benjamin took a small step forward, his shoes sinking slightly into the wet grass. "And yet you're in such a hurry to bury her," he said quietly. "Too much of a hurry, if you ask me." The words hit like stones. The pastor looked down at his Bible, his fingers trembling. Judith's aunt, sitting in the front row, turned sharply toward William, her brow furrowed. "What does he mean?" she asked, but William ignored her. Benjamin continued, his voice steady now, almost compassionate. "She was given something that slows the heart, cools the skin. It fools the eye, but it doesn't fool life itself. I've seen it before. She's not gone, not yet." One of the guards took a hesitant step toward him, but the man's words seemed to pull everyone into a trance. Even those who had called him mad were staring now, drawn in by the strange certainty in his voice. William broke the silence again, shouting, "Enough of this! This man is sick!" He turned to the guards, his face red with fury. "Remove him now." But the guards exchanged uncertain looks. One of them whispered, "What if he's telling the truth?" The other frowned, glancing at the crowd's growing unease. No one dared make the first move. Benjamin's voice dropped lower, each word a hammer hitting conscience. "You spoke to Dr. David about a quick burial, didn't you? You told him to sign the papers, to make it official before anyone could ask questions." William froze. The color drained from his face. The crowd caught it. That flicker of fear and murmuring turned into disbelief. Someone gasped aloud. The pastor's hand twitched, his Bible lowering an inch. Benjamin's eyes softened when they turned back to the casket. His voice grew quiet, almost reverent. "She trusted you, Williams, and you betrayed her." For a long moment, no one moved. The rain clouds drifted overhead, shadows stretching across the white tent. Then slowly, the pastor's trembling hands lowered his Bible all the way down to his side. His lips parted, but no words came. He simply stared, at the husband, at the stranger, and at the golden casket that now seemed far too alive to be buried. The silence was no longer respectful, it was terrified. The tension in the air felt almost visible now. Cameras glinted beneath the tent as the rain held its breath above the clouds. The man everyone called a madman was suddenly the only person speaking sense. Benjamin's chest rose and fell as he turned toward the crowd, his hands shaking. Not with fear, but with urgency. She was given a slowing agent, he said clearly, his voice rough yet steady. A substance that mimics death. It slows the heart, cools the body, and fools even a doctor's touch. But she's not gone. She's trapped. The mourners looked at one another in disbelief. One woman clutched her pearls tighter. A man at the back muttered, "This is absurd." Yet no one walked away. Everyone stayed to see what would happen next. William Anderson stepped forward, his voice sharp with rage. "Enough of this," he barked. "You have no right to be here, and you certainly have no right to spread this nonsense. My wife is dead." The doctor confirmed it. Benjamin met his eyes without flinching. "Then why won't you let them check her pulse again?" The question hit William like a blow. His face hardened, but his lips pressed tight as if the answer had caught in his throat. Murmurs stirred among the crowd, hesitant at first, then louder, bolder. "He's right," someone said. "What's the harm in checking?" Dr. David, standing a few feet away, shifted uncomfortably. He cleared his throat and forced a smile. "People, please," he said. "I performed every examination. The body is cold. There's no pulse. Grief is clouding this man's mind." But Benjamin took a step toward him, his eyes fierce. "Grief?" he echoed. "You talk about grief while you stand over the woman who gave you everything? She built your hospital. She bought your car. And you thank her with betrayal." Gasps filled the tent. Dr. David's forced composure cracked. He looked down, avoiding every pair of eyes staring at him. William tried to regain control. "This is slander," he snapped. "You're accusing me of—" "I'm not accusing," Benjamin interrupted quietly. "I'm remembering. I heard you, the night before the burial, by the bridge near St. Matthew's. You were in your car, arguing with this doctor. You said, 'We bury her tomorrow before anyone suspects.' Those were your words." The crowd fell into stunned silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Judith's aunt rose slowly from the front row, her silver headscarf glinting in the dull light. She was a small woman, but her presence commanded the space. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "If there's even the smallest chance she's alive," she said, "then we will check. That's my sister's daughter in that coffin. We will not lower her into the ground without knowing for sure." William spun toward her, fury flashing in his eyes. "Aunt Grace, you can't let this madness—" Her gaze cut through him like glass. "Enough, William. You've spoken enough today." Applause didn't follow, but the silence carried power. Two women moved closer to the casket, nodding at Benjamin. "Tell us what to do," one whispered. Benjamin exhaled, his voice softening. "We need to lift her head slightly. She needs air." He slipped off his tattered coat and folded it neatly, as though it were the most precious fabric in the world. Kneeling by the casket, he whispered, "Please help me." The aunt hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Lift her gently," she said to the young men nearby. "Do as he says." Together, they stepped forward. The casket gleamed under the heavy sky as they reached for Judith's shoulders. The gold shimmered against the white of her dress, her face untouched by decay, peaceful, but too perfect, too still. Benjamin's hands trembled as he touched the edge of the casket. He brushed a strand of hair from Judith's face and whispered something no one else could hear. Then louder, "She's here. I can feel it." A young man adjusted her posture just enough for Benjamin to slide the folded coat beneath her neck. "Good," he murmured. "Keep her steady." The aunt stepped forward and removed the cotton from Judith's nostrils with shaken fingers. When she did, the faintest whisper of air brushed across her skin. Or maybe it was only wishful thinking. But the crowd saw it. They saw something change, however small, and a collective gasp ran through them like electricity. William's voice rose again, panicked this time. "This is madness. You're desecrating the dead." But no one moved to stop Benjamin. Not the guards, not the pastor, not the mourners. All eyes were fixed on him as he reached into his bag, pulling out a small, weathered vial. The glass caught the light, faintly amber, old and worn from years of travel. "This," Benjamin said softly, "is the neutralizer. The only thing that can wake her." William's voice cracked. "You're not putting that in her mouth." But the crowd was no longer on his side. "Let him try," someone said. "What harm can it do?" Benjamin's expression was calm but grave. "If I'm wrong, she will rest peacefully," he said. "But if I'm right," his voice faltered, heavy with hope, "then we'll see the truth." The pastor lowered his Bible, his hand trembling. "Then let him," he whispered. The wind rustled the tent again. slow and deliberate, like the earth itself was waiting. Benjamin knelt by the coffin, his head bowed, and the world around him felt utterly still, as if even time had paused to see whether the beggar's faith would defy the grave. The cemetery was no longer quiet. It was holding its breath. Every eye was locked on the man kneeling beside the golden casket. Benjamin's hands trembled as he held the small brown vial up to the light. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, catching every flicker of sun that slipped through the clouds. "This," he whispered, "is the neutralizer." The words rippled through the crowd. Phones were lifted again, cameras zooming in. Reporters murmured to one another, already tasting tomorrow's headline. Wealthy guests who once whispered behind silk handkerchiefs now leaned forward, unable to look away. Benjamin exhaled slowly and unscrewed the cap. The faint click of glass echoed through the tent. He dipped the dropper inside and turned toward Judith's still body. "Come back, madam," he murmured. "You've rested long enough." Williams lunged forward. "Stop him," he shouted. "He's insane." But Aunt Grace stepped into his path. Her frail frame suddenly fierce. Her voice cut through the air. "Enough, William. Let him do what you refused to do. Care." William froze, stunned. The guards hesitated, caught between power and conscience. The pastor clutched his Bible but didn't move. No one dared interrupt the moment that was unfolding. Benjamin leaned over the casket. Judith's face looked carved from porcelain, her lips pale, her lashes dusted against her cheeks like they were drawn by hand. He steadied his shaking hands, lifted the dropper, and held it above her parted lips. The crowd fell into silence so deep it seemed to swallow sound. Even the wind paused, as if afraid to disturb whatever might come next. Benjamin whispered again, softer now. "Come back, madam, please." A single drop fell. It landed gently on her tongue. Nothing. Benjamin's hand wavered. Seconds dragged like hours. Someone whispered, "He's lost his mind." Another voice trembled. "What if it's true?" Benjamin didn't look up. His lips moved silently, counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3. Still nothing. Judith's body remained motionless, her skin cold beneath the weak sun. The crowd began to murmur. Disappointment spread like a slow wave. William exhaled sharply, relief slipping into arrogance. "You see?" he said, his voice trembling with forced calm. "This circus ends now." But Benjamin didn't stop. He dipped the dropper again, his hand steadier this time. He raised it above her lips once more. "Come back," he whispered, his eyes glistening. "You're stronger than the poison. Breathe." The second drop fell. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then, a sound. Soft, fragile, barely there. A faint cough. Gasps tore through the air. Someone screamed. A woman covered her mouth, sobbing. Another dropped her phone in shock. Benjamin froze, his eyes wide. "She's breathing," he whispered. "I told you, she's alive." Judith's hand twitched. Her fingers curled slightly, the movement small but unmistakable. The aunt pressed trembling fingers to her niece's wrist. Her voice cracked with awe. "She's warm," she cried. "Dear God, she's warm." The tent erupted into chaos. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Others wept openly. Cameras flashed, voices shouted, and yet through it all, Benjamin stayed still, his hands hovering protectively near Judith's face. "She's not dead," he said again, louder this time. "I told you, she's alive." William staggered backward, his face ashen. His hand went to his jacket, fumbling for something. The metallic glint caught the sunlight, sharp, quick, dangerous. The aunt gasped. "William, what are you doing?" His eyes were wild, desperate. "She wasn't supposed to wake up," he hissed. The guards moved, but too slowly. Benjamin rose slightly, his eyes locking on the weapon. Was it a knife? A syringe? Or something worse? No one could tell, only that the man's hand shook violently and his mask of grief had shattered completely. The pastor shouted, "Drop it, William," but his voice was drowned by the chaos. Benjamin stepped forward instinctively, shielding Judith's body. And then, from the casket, came a sound that silenced them all. A long, trembling breath. Judith's chest lifted weakly. Her lips parted, color creeping faintly back into them. Her voice, hoarse and broken, slipped through the air like a ghost returning from the edge. "Why?" The question barely left her mouth before the crowd fell into stunned stillness. Benjamin's eyes glistened as he leaned close, whispering through his tears, "Because you were never meant to die." And somewhere behind them, William's hand tightened on the metallic object. The sunlight glinting off it one last time as the line between life and death disappeared before everyone's eyes. The world fractured in that instant. The golden casket that had once symbolized finality now held a miracle. Judith Anderson, the woman everyone had mourned, breathing again. Her lips trembled, her chest rose, and her weak whisper cut through the chaos. Why? The crowd froze. Then, pandemonium. Gasps turned into screams, screams into prayers. Some clutched their rosaries, others fell to their knees. The press, previously respectful in silence, surged forward, cameras clicking in a frenzy. Benjamin stood beside the casket, his heart pounding. The man they'd called a beggar was now the only thing standing between life and death, between the truth and the man who wanted it buried. William's hand jerked upward, revealing the object that had glinted under the sun. A syringe. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, its contents unknown, but its purpose unmistakable. "She belongs in the ground," William roared, his voice breaking into madness. "You don't understand. She was supposed to stay dead." The guards moved at once. Two rushed toward him, wrestling for the syringe. The aunt screamed, clutching her chest. "Help! Somebody stop him!" Judith's body convulsed slightly, a weak cough escaping her throat. Her eyes fluttered open for real this time, unfocused but aware. "William," her voice cracked, fragile but cutting through the noise. "Why would you do this to me?" The guards pinned him, but he fought like a man possessed. "Because you were never supposed to have it all," he shouted. "You think I wanted your pity? Your empire? Your name on everything while I stood in your shadow?" Benjamin moved closer to Judith, his voice trembling with gentle urgency. "You're safe now, madam. Don't move. You're safe." He pressed his tattered coat around her shoulders, shielding her from the cold wind and the eyes that now saw her not as a corpse, but as a living miracle. The aunt fell to her knees beside the casket, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my child, they nearly buried you alive." Judith's gaze locked onto her husband. Her voice was thin but fierce. "You poisoned me." William stopped struggling, his chest heaving. His mask of grief crumbled, replaced by something raw and ugly. "You don't understand," he spat. "It should have been me. I built that empire with you. I was there for every board meeting, every deal. But you took everything. You left nothing for me." His words echoed through the cemetery like thunder. Even the guards paused for a second, stunned by his confession. Cameras zoomed in, microphones thrust forward. Reporters were already narrating what would become breaking news. Billionaire resurrected during burial, husband implicated. Judith coughed again, each breath painful but determined. "I loved you," she whispered. "I trusted you with everything, and you tried to bury me for power." William's body sagged in the guard's grip. He looked down at the syringe still clutched in his fist, the last symbol of his control. "I deserved everything you had," he said softly, voice cracking. "You were supposed to die. You were supposed to make me free." Benjamin's eyes darkened. "No one deserves freedom bought with blood," he said quietly. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The crowd parted as officers sprinted through the gates, weapons drawn, uniforms gleaming under the sun. The flashing red and blue lights painted the marble graves like scenes from a nightmare. Judith leaned her head weakly against the side of the casket. Benjamin held her steady, his calloused hand against her trembling back. "Breathe," he whispered. "Don't let his hate steal what life you still have." The police took hold of William, forcing the syringe from his grip. The needle clattered onto the stone with a sharp ping, echoing like the end of something enormous. He didn't fight anymore. He just stared. Not at Judith, not at the crowd, but at the ground, as though realizing too late that the grave he dug for her had always been meant for him. Reporters shouted questions. The pastor wept openly. And Benjamin, covered in dust and sweat, looked up toward the sky. "Thank you," he murmured, voice trembling. "Thank you for letting her wake." Judith turned her eyes toward him, tears tracing down her pale cheeks. "You saved me," she whispered. "Why?" He shook his head slowly. "Because someone needed to." The police hauled William toward their car. The crowd parted in silence, watching the man who'd stood over his wife's coffin now escorted like a criminal under the same tent where he'd wept false tears. As the sirens faded into the distance, the press swarmed the scene, capturing every angle, every face, every gasp. The story had already begun spreading online. Headlines forming in real time. Billionaire declared dead, revives during burial. Husband arrested for attempted murder. Homeless man saves CEO from premature burial. But Benjamin wasn't thinking about headlines. He only looked at Judith, fragile and alive in the sunlight. And as the pastor whispered a prayer of gratitude, the narrator's final words lingered over the scene like a truth carved in stone. That day, a woman came back from the grave, and a man's soul was buried instead. The headlines might have told one version of the story, but the truth didn't begin at the cemetery. It started weeks earlier. Inside the marble halls of the Anderson estate, where greed was already planning its quiet victory. Williams Anderson had once been a man of charm and ambition, but standing beside Judith's success for years had hollowed him out. The world called her the Iron Lady of Lagos, the queen who built 3 towers, who moved markets with her signature. Every magazine cover bore her name. Every boardroom whispered her influence. And for William, every one of those headlines was a reminder that he was only a shadow standing next to her light. He didn't want to share her crown anymore. He wanted to wear it. The plan was born not from madness, but from entitlement. Judith's empire was worth billions. Construction, real estate, shipping, oil contracts stretching from Abuja to Dubai. She trusted her husband with her accounts, her calendar, even her medical records. That trust became his weapon. One night, under the glow of the chandeliers, William sat across from Dr. David, Judith's personal physician. The doctor's hands trembled as he accepted a crystal glass of whiskey. "She's exhausted," William said quietly, his tone almost sympathetic. "Overworked. She won't rest. It's only a matter of time before her heart gives out." Dr. David frowned. "She needs treatment." Not what?" William cut in, his eyes narrowing. "Not what I'm about to suggest?" The doctor's silence was enough of an answer. William leaned back, the faintest smile forming. "You'll help me. You'll declare her gone. I'll handle the rest." Dr. David's voice broke. "That's murder." William's tone stayed cold. "No, it's mercy and inheritance." He slid a small brown envelope across the table. Inside, bundles of cash. "You've served this family for 12 years. Don't pretend loyalty doesn't have a price." The doctor stared at the money for a long moment before whispering, "And if she wakes?" "She won't." But fate, as always, had other plans. The night before the burial, Benjamin had been sleeping under the bridge not far from the Anderson estate. Rain had soaked his thin blanket, forcing him to seek shelter under the highway near the mansion's private drive. He was half asleep when he heard the familiar purr of a luxury car engine. He turned and saw headlights cutting through the mist. Voices followed. "She's cold already," a man said, William's voice, unmistakable in its sharp arrogance. "By morning she'll be under the soil, and the board will have to sign everything over." Dr. David's voice shook. "What if someone notices? Her aunt has been asking questions." William scoffed. "You'll sign the certificate. Say it was cardiac failure. The woman ran herself to death. Who would question that?" Benjamin's heart pounded. He crept closer, staying hidden in the darkness. "And the compound?" the doctor whispered. "Handled," William said flatly. "The sedative mimics death for hours. By the time it fades, she'll be 6 feet under. Perfect." Benjamin pressed his back to the concrete wall, cold water dripping onto his neck. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. A husband planning to bury his wife alive. A doctor helping him. He waited until their car pulled away before stepping out. His fists clenched. He had nothing. No home, no power, no audience. But his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. He spent that night writing Judith's name in the mud with a stick, whispering prayers to a God he wasn't sure still listened. By morning, he was at the cemetery gate, soaked, hungry, but determined. When the guards tried to stop him, he pushed through. When the mourners mocked him, he kept walking. He had seen too many people die without a voice. He wouldn't let one more vanish under lies and marble. Now, days later, Judith lay in a private hospital room, pale but alive. The empire she had built was shaken, but still standing. Reporters camped outside. The nation buzzed with disbelief. But inside the quiet room, there was only the faint rhythm of her breathing and the steady beep of the monitors beside her. The aunt sat nearby, whispering prayers under her breath. Nurses came and went softly, careful not to disturb the woman who had cheated death. Then, for the first time since the cemetery, Judith stirred. Her fingers twitched against the blanket. Her eyes fluttered open, slowly, as if waking from a dream too heavy to forget. Her lips parted, dry and cracked, but the word that escaped was clear: Benjamin. And though her voice was a whisper, it carried enough weight to fill the room. The name of the man who had nothing, yet risked everything, echoing through the silence like a prayer, returned. The sun crept gently through the white curtains of Judith Anderson's hospital suite, spilling over a woman who looked like she had walked through death and returned with fire in her eyes. Machines hummed softly beside her bed, steady, rhythmic proof that life had chosen to stay. Judith's eyes opened slowly. Her body felt heavy, her throat dry, but her mind was alive. The last thing she remembered was darkness, the sound of dirt falling, the echo of her husband's voice saying words no wife should ever hear. Now she was here, alive, breathing, surrounded by nurses who moved carefully, as if afraid the air itself might shatter her. When the nurse leaned over to check her vitals, Judith's voice cracked into the quiet. "Where's the man who saved me?" The nurse smiled softly. "He's in the waiting room, ma'am. He hasn't left since they brought you in." Judith blinked back tears. "Bring him to me." Outside the glass doors, chaos brewed. Dozens of reporters crowded the hospital entrance, shouting into cameras. Headlines flashed across every major network. Billionaire CEO rises from the dead. Husband and doctor arrested in premeditated murder plot. Homeless man becomes national hero. William and Dr. David had been taken away in handcuffs hours after the cemetery. Their photos were already plastered across the internet. One face twisted in denial, the other sunk in shame. The empire William had craved was now crumbling under the weight of scandal. Inside the room, the air shifted as the door opened slowly. Benjamin stepped in, his worn coat freshly washed, his hair trimmed, but the same quiet gravity surrounded him. He stopped just short of her bed, his eyes lowering respectfully. "You shouldn't be standing," he said softly. "You need rest." Judith tried to smile. "Rest? I've been doing that for days." Her voice was weak but threaded with humor. "Please, sit." Benjamin hesitated, then took the chair beside her. The silence between them felt sacred, two people connected by something neither could explain. "Why?" she finally asked. Her voice trembled. "Why did you save me?" Benjamin's eyes flickered as if searching for the right place to begin. "Because once," he said slowly, "no one saved my wife when they buried her too soon." Judith's breath caught. "Your wife?" he nodded, the weight of the memory pulling at every word. "Her name was Clara. She was my whole world. She'd struggled for years after losing our little girl. One night she took too much of her medication, and I thought she was sleeping. When she didn't wake, the doctor came, took one look, and said she was gone." His voice tightened. "I begged them to wait. I said I felt her warmth. I said she wasn't gone. But they called me a madman, just like they called me at your funeral." He swallowed hard, his hands gripping his knees. "By the time I found the courage to go back and dig where they buried her, it was too late. She had clawed at the coffin lid from the inside." Judith's tears came silently, her body trembling with empathy. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Benjamin shook his head. "That night broke me. I stopped being a husband, stopped being a man. I lost everything. My home, my purpose, my faith. But when I heard your husband speaking of a burial before dawn, I couldn't walk away. I thought maybe saving you could save what was left of me." The words hung in the air, heavy and pure. Judith reached for his hand, her fingers brushing the rough skin that had dug her out of death's reach. "You saved me," she said quietly. "Not the doctors, not the guards, you." He lowered his head. "I only did what any soul with a conscience would do." She smiled faintly through her tears. "No, you did what only a good man would do." Outside, the muffled sound of cameras flashed through the window glass. The world saw Benjamin as a hero, but inside that room he was just a man haunted by loss and redeemed by courage. Judith squeezed his hand gently. "I have everything, money, companies, power, but I lost the one thing I thought couldn't die, trust." Her eyes softened. "You gave me back my life, Benjamin. Let me give you something in return. Not charity, not payment, but dignity." He looked up, startled. "You don't owe me anything." "I do," she said firmly, her voice regaining its strength. "You saved my life. Let me help you rebuild yours." Their eyes held, billionaire and beggar, survivor and savior, bound by a single truth that neither status nor wealth could buy. And for the first time in years, Benjamin allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, life was giving him a second chance too. The courthouse was packed long before the trial began. Cameras flashed outside, reporters shouted over one another, and every news outlet in the country had the same headline: "The billionaire who came back from the grave." Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Every seat was taken. Lawyers, business executives, journalists, and ordinary citizens all pressed in to witness what had become the trial of the decade. At the center of it sat William Anderson. His once impeccable suit rumpled, his face drained of the arrogance that used to command boardrooms. Beside him, Dr. David slouched with trembling hands, his eyes fixed on the floor. Judith entered quietly through the side door, escorted by hospital security. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, no makeup, just the quiet authority of a woman who had stared into the grave and come back stronger. Behind her walked Benjamin, dressed in a plain suit that still looked borrowed but carried more dignity than any silk tie in the room. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and steel in her tone, struck her gavel. "This court is now in session." The prosecutor rose. "My lady, we are here to prove that the defendant, William Anderson, conspired with Dr. David Aori to fake the death of his wife, Judith Anderson, with intent to seize control of her multi-billion-dollar corporation." He turned sharply toward the accused. "A crime born not from desperation, but greed." William leaned forward, voice steady but hollow. "I deny every charge. I loved my wife. We were victims of a misunderstanding." The courtroom murmured. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding that involved a syringe filled with paralytic poison?" He lifted an evidence bag. The clear fluid caught the light. "Or perhaps this neutralizer, found in the hands of the man you called insane." William's jaw tightened. "You have no proof I used it." The prosecutor smiled faintly. "Then let's ask your partner." All eyes turned to Dr. David. Sweat glistened on his forehead. He began, voice shaking. "I was forced. He threatened to ruin me, to take my license, my family, everything. He told me to sign the certificate. I thought she was dead." "Thought?" the prosecutor pressed. Dr. David's face crumpled. "I knew," he whispered. "I knew she wasn't." Gasps filled the room. Judith lowered her head, tears glistening in her eyes. Benjamin's hand rested quietly on her arm, steadying her. The prosecutor faced the judge. "My lady, we have the poison, we have the syringe, we have the victim alive before this court, and we have the witness who risked his life to stop a woman from being buried alive." He turned to Benjamin. "Mr. Okoro, please stand." Benjamin rose slowly, his voice quiet but unshakable. "I only did what was right," he said. "When the world looks away from the truth, someone has to stand in its path." The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. "The court finds the defendants guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud." A collective gasp swept through the room. William collapsed into his chair, his empire shattering with the verdict. Dr. David buried his face in his hands. Judith turned toward Benjamin, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's over." He nodded. "No, ma'am," he said softly. "It's just beginning." As the cameras flashed, the narrator's final words hung in the air like a moral carved into stone. The man they called a beggar became the voice of justice. The courtroom victory made headlines around the world, but Benjamin wanted none of it. While Judith's legal team fought to reclaim her empire and restructure Anderson Towers, he quietly slipped away from the spotlight. Reporters searched for him, eager to brand him the homeless hero, but Benjamin was nowhere to be found. Judith tried reaching him through the hospital, through the police, even through local shelters, but every trail went cold. Weeks later, she finally found him, sitting on a park bench under the same bridge where he had once slept. His coat was cleaner now, but his spirit carried the same humility that had made him step forward on that fateful day. When she approached, Benjamin stood immediately, embarrassed. "You shouldn't be here, ma'am," he said softly. "You belong in boardrooms, not under bridges." Judith smiled faintly. "And you belong where good men are needed most." He looked away. "You've done enough. I don't need anything from you. I've had enough of the world's generosity." "I'm not offering charity," she replied. "I'm offering gratitude." But Benjamin shook his head. "Money doesn't fix what's gone. My wife, my little girl, they're gone. I just want peace, not payment." Judith's voice softened. "Then at least tell me who you were before all this." He hesitated, then sighed. "I was a healer once, I ran a small clinic for people who couldn't afford hospitals. We treated the forgotten, street kids, widows, laborers. My wife worked beside me. When we lost her and our child, everything fell apart. The building closed. The patients vanished. And so did I. His words struck her deeper than he realized. A man who once saved lives had been left to vanish, unseen by the same society that now worshipped his courage. She felt the sting of guilt. She too had built an empire on concrete towers, while people like him slept beneath them. Days later, Benjamin woke to find a car waiting for him near the park. The driver handed him an envelope with a single card inside. It read, "The Benjamin Foundation for the Forgotten, Grand Opening." He frowned, confused, until he read the rest. In honor of a man who reminded the world that compassion is the truest form of wealth. The next morning, he stood in front of a new building in the heart of the city, his old clinic, rebuilt from the ground up. The sign above the glass doors bore his name in gold letters. Reporters gathered again, but this time the story was different. No longer about scandal or greed or resurrection, but about redemption. Judith stood beside him in a simple gray suit, smiling through tears. "You gave me back my life," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Now I'll give others a chance to live too." Benjamin turned toward her, eyes glistening. "You didn't have to do this," she smiled. "Yes, I did, because the world forgot you, but I never will." As the cameras clicked, Judith took the scissors in her hand and cut the red ribbon. The crowd erupted in applause. In that moment, two people stood reborn, one who had clawed her way out of a coffin, and another who had been buried by grief long before her. The billionaire and the beggar, side by side, no longer divided by class or circumstance, but united by the truth that had saved them both. Weeks passed, but the story never faded. Across the world, people spoke the name Benjamin Okoro with reverence, the man who stopped a funeral, defied the powerful, and gave a billionaire back her breath. Yet Benjamin himself wanted no spotlight, no interviews, no applause. He had never chased attention, he had only followed his conscience. Judith Anderson returned to her company, but she was no longer the woman the business world once feared. The sharp edges of her ambition had softened. She walked into boardrooms not as a symbol of power, but as a survivor who understood that wealth without humanity was a hollow crown. Every speech she gave began the same way. "There was once a man who had nothing, but he gave me everything." She poured her energy into the Benjamin Foundation for the Forgotten, ensuring it would stand as a sanctuary for those society ignored, the poor, the sick, the overlooked. On the day of its official launch, Benjamin stood at her side again. He wore a simple suit, his hands clasped, his eyes humbled by the hundreds of lives that would soon walk through those doors. Judith stepped forward to speak, her voice calm, steady, filled with emotion. "He didn't just save my life," she said, glancing at Benjamin. "He reminded me what life was worth." Applause followed, but Benjamin simply smiled, almost shyly. To him, this moment wasn't about recognition. It was about peace, something he had been searching for since the day he lost his wife and child. Watching Judith rise from her ashes had helped him do the same. Later that evening, after the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Judith found him standing outside, looking at the skyline. The sun was sinking behind the towers that bore her name, towers once built on pride, now rebuilt with purpose. "Do you ever think about what happened?" she asked softly. Benjamin nodded. "Every day," he admitted, "but not with regret. I used to believe I lost everything. Then I realized I was wrong. I just hadn't found the right reason to live again." Judith smiled. "And now you have." He turned to her, eyes warm. "We both have." They stood in silence for a while, the hum of the city around them fading into the distance. Two souls from opposite worlds, one born of marble towers, the other from cracked pavements, united by a single truth: compassion is the rarest form of wealth. As Judith's car pulled away that night, her thoughts echoed like a whisper against the glass. Some riches lie in marble towers. Others live in the heart of a man who speaks when everyone else stays silent. Benjamin watched the car disappear, the faint glow of the city lights reflecting in his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt light, not from money or fame, but from purpose. And when history remembered him, it wasn't for his rags, his scars, or his pain. It was for his courage, the quiet kind that changes lives without demanding credit. The world would forever remember him as the man who stopped death once and taught the living how to breathe again. What would you have done if you were Benjamin? Comment your country flag to show where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Souls and Riches Stories channel because lessons are priceless.